welcome to the Knock Knock Episode 5 Q&A. My name is Jason B. Jones, and I'm here with my brother and our communications director, Simon Jones. Hey, Simon.
Hey, Jason. How's it going?
Good, man. It's been a little bit. Thanks for coming on and gathering all the questions so we could have this Q&A episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everyone who's tuning in and who's listened to Episode 5.
Yeah, man. It's I feel like Episode 5, and we'll get into this in a second, was just super dense. Like, I think episodes prior, we were really trying to tell a story and make it dynamic, and this one, we just had to get into the nitty-gritty of the conversation I had with Bill Lott. So, yeah, I just want to thank everyone for jumping back into this and holding on. We got a lot of great comments of people who are really interested in the details, and man, we really appreciate it. So this past episode, I feel like what it did is it really got us from the stories of the past into the investigation of the present. And I know that most people, including myself, who are fans of true crime podcast, are way more interested in what's happening now and what can be done to really move the case forward. But, I mean, as I'm sure you understand, with both the age of the case and the personal nature, we just really felt compelled to spend time to really go through Betty and Catherine's lives, and both Simon and my and our family and Juki's family, our connection to this case. That was, as we've talked about from the beginning, that was really important. I wanted to have an archive, some way that we could really capture this story for us forever. And the fact that you're listening to it makes it even more special. But now I feel like, as I mentioned in the episode, we've turned the corner. And what we now want to do is to focus on what is actively happening in the case in real time. Simon, I'd just be curious to know sort of your overall thoughts about Episode 5.
Yeah, and I want to follow up real quick on what you just said. It was really important for us to probably, as a first point, to archive, like you said, but also for our audience, we wanted to try to bring them in closer to understand who these people were. Like, okay, yes, there was a murder. There's a murder every day, sadly. Who were these people? Why should I care? How were they special? How were they any different? What was unique about them? What lives did they touch? And we felt like the murders had already been documented and the facts had already been presented, but what was lacking was who the people were.
Right.
What was their story?
Right.
What was the shockwave? What was the domino effect? None of that was in the news. None of that really had a voice in the past, and we felt like that was a real shame, and we wanted to tell that story. So as we move further into the facts of the case and the details and the investigation and where we are present day, we find ourselves in Episode 5, and I really enjoyed it. We've heard from Bill Lott, pieces of Bill Lott in all of our past episodes practically, and now I felt like we get to be in the car with you. We get to be with you and Jason Adams in the car as we ride around Starkville, and we get to hear from the man who, I mean, let's face it, knows the most about the case, and who we hope ultimately will be the one to crack it.
Yeah, and what I wanted people to see, the reason I played it in the way that I did, I think someone mentioned to me, wow, this episode's a lot different than how you've done episodes in the past, where we've wanted to make it really sort of like telling a story and punching in different quotes from different people. Here's the deal, guys. Like, I was in the car and hearing stuff for the very first time. This is not like Bill and I knew each other super well. This was the first time I'd ever met him face to face, and he was gracious enough to say, "Hey, man, get in the car and we'll talk about things." And I just had a recorder on, so I was hearing this in real time. Now, there are a lot of other true crime podcasts where, and we mentioned this from the beginning, where the host is not directly connected with the case, and and I'm going to be honest, like it's hard for me to be objective in any of these interviews that I'm doing. I can oftentimes get emotional or connected to it. And I think Simon, I think we talked about this before, but like, if anyone ever wanted to take this over and continue it further, I think that they would probably be better equipped and more objective than I am. I just felt like when we started this is that no one was going to tell the story if I didn't.
Yeah.
And this was really the culmination of that, is sitting down with the lead detective and hearing that for the first time. So I was glad to just show that, even though I probably stumbled around and sounded probably like a moron in parts, but I just wanted people to hear actually how I heard it, you know?
Yeah. Like you said, in real time, and that's why I said it felt like we were like in the back seat, you know, with you in the car, and I felt like that was a pretty neat perspective, that it wasn't just a formal sit down, here's a microphone interview, that we're riding in the police car, we're going through the conversation as it happens, and just, I don't know, it kind of felt more real that way. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome, man. Well, I want to just give listeners a couple of short updates since our last episode, and then we'll jump into, you know, the biggest part of this, which is Q&A. But I wanted everybody to know, because we've had people ask us questions, both you know, in emails, but also in person. We have a lot of personal friends here in the Nashville area that, I mean, they ask me about the podcast. Feels at least weekly, if not daily, and everybody continues to ask how things are going with sort of this idea of national attention. And so we're still having great conversations with these people who are associated with a national television show, and they're super interested in exploring both the case and the story. One of them has gone so far as to come and visit with us, with Juki's family, and even traveled to Starkville to talk with law enforcement and people there on the ground. I would just ask, and I don't know if I've asked this before, but I would just ask that everyone keep this opportunity in your thoughts and prayers as we pursue these amazing opportunities. Who knows what will happen, but I really feel like if this podcast, if the only thing that comes from our feeble efforts to get this story out is that someone who is an expert at this, who has more influence, will take this from us and take it to the next level, then all of this is worth it to me. And Simon, I know you feel the same way. And actually, it all kind of started with you, this opportunity.
Yeah, an individual reached out to me and interested in knowing more and getting in contact with you, and then that was kind of the first door that led to many other doors that led to meeting with the families, and hopefully, fingers crossed, leads to an end goal of national attention in the future. When that will be, we don't know, but definitely wheels are turning and something could happen, and that gives us hope. As wonderful as our audience has been, it's going to be on a smaller scale than when it reaches a national platform that goes out to millions of people, you know. So it would be a really great opportunity, much like back years after the murder when it appeared on national television for the first time. That was an important moment for the case, and while it didn't lead to a conviction, it definitely raised attention, definitely brought in more tips, clues to the Starkville Police Department, and I feel like there's any chance that could happen again is worth pursuing with all efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to extend a extremely warm thank you and congratulations. If you have followed us on social media, we found out a couple of weeks ago that our friend and teammate, Jason Adams, who you heard on episode 5, he was in the back seat with me and Sergeant Bill Lott in Starkville for episode 5's interview. Since our last episode, Jason was awarded a gold Addy for his hard work on our trailer, which if you haven't seen it, you can watch it at knockknockpodcast.com. And man, we just really couldn't have gotten this far without his vision and mentorship and hard work. I'm just forever grateful for everybody who has continued to take interest and pour into what we're doing, especially people with such talent like Jason Adams. And we just couldn't be more happy for him. I think that out of all tragedies, good things happen, and I'm just so glad it couldn't have happened to a better guy. He's a dear friend. He's a super talented guy, and man, I'm just so happy for him.
Yeah. Myself and I could speak for our family is just forever indebted to his interest for being somebody that didn't grow up with the story, who we brought the story to him, and then he chose to take an interest. It just meant so much, and then turns out an amazing video like he did to capture the imagination and the interest of people was just so unexpected, and we're truly grateful for his talents and interest.
Yeah. Well, Simon, let's jump into some questions from the Knock Knock community.
Yeah, so we have a few things to go through for this Q&A episode. We'll start with a voicemail, and then we'll move on to some other messages we've received.
Hi, this is Brittany from Flora, Mississippi. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed episode 5. I thought the information about familial DNA searching was really interesting. I'm just curious if anyone has started the process to pass legislation to allow familial DNA searches in Mississippi. Thanks, guys. Keep up the great work.
Brittany, thanks so much for calling in, and that's a great question. That's, as you've picked up on, that's really where all of this is leading, is this idea of familial search. I went through it a little bit in the episode, but just to recap, the way that DNA searching has historically gone is that it's a one-to-one match, meaning if they found a DNA strand at a scene, they would then compare it to the database that they've accumulated from convicted felons. And they would then compare that DNA to that registry, and if they had a 100% match, then that was evidence enough to get a conviction. What familial search does, which in the day and age of Google, just think about that. Like, you can go to Google right now and type in anything. You could type in true crime podcasts, and Google's algorithms will look for context clues to be able to try and find the best result for the search that you're offering. You can kind of think of familial search a bit like that, as I've been educated about it, which I'm a novice. Or our next episode, we're going to talk to someone who is a absolute expert in this, and they will give you a lot more details. But as I understand it, what it does is it takes certain parts of the DNA strand and allows, just through simple software, for you to be able to do a wider search. Now, what that means is that doesn't mean that if anything were to pop up, there's your guy. But what it does is it gives you new clues in order to be able to search further.
Science-based.
Yeah, it's really saying, like, here's some genetic material that would match family. Like Simon, one of the things I think I mentioned in the episode is that Mom always told us that we should be nice to each other because there's no closer blood relative than you are to me, which means, as you dig into the science, that our DNA strands are very, very similar because we came from both the same mom and dad. And so if I were to go and commit a crime and they were to look at Simon's DNA, they could find connective parts to our strands to be able to at least get a lead to tie us together. And there's been a lot of instances, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our next episode, there have been instances where they've used this particular way to search to get law enforcement the leads that they need in order to be able to do this. Now, one of the things that Sergeant Lott told me is that they don't just use that. It's not like a witch hunt. They don't go and find something that loosely matches and then bust down a door and arrest someone. But what they can do is they can then go and speak to that person. They can get a DNA sample from them, and then they can go back to the one-to-one search. Meaning, then they could say, here's a pure DNA strand from a suspect. Does it match the sample that we have? And if so, that's how they can get a conviction. So that's just a brief overview of DNA and familial search as I understand it. But what's really interesting, and getting back to your question, Brittany, is right after this episode came out, of course, I let Sergeant Lott know that we had finally posted his interview in sort of like the whole thing for our listeners. And I just want to read a couple of things that he sent back to me. He said that, he's currently speaking with the Mississippi Chief of Police, the president of the Mississippi Chief of Police, and who is also the former director of the Mississippi Crime Lab. And he's supporting familial search. And that he's spoken with the Mississippi Attorney General and the current director of the Mississippi Crime Lab, and he believes that they can get familial search approved, but that they don't have a timetable left. He went on to say that we may need to get a grassroots movement of people really encouraging lawmakers to get things moving. Right now, he says that the train is on the right track, but we've got to get it going and onto its destination. So he is actively involved and is saying the right things and finding the right people to do what he can. But what I feel, and we'll talk more about this, Simon, is that I feel like there's room for us to play a part in really encouraging these lawmakers that this is an important change that needs to be made. The other thing that we've talked about is, and not just for Betty, like, we don't know if familial search will work in this case, but it's a good next step. But I'm pretty confident that familial search will work for someone, for some case out there that's cold. And for me, I just feel like it's one of those, well, why wouldn't we do that if we could get some cases, some traction, and hopefully find resolution? I know you feel the same way too, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is part of what we've thought about often in this process is that Betty's voice was taken away, and we wonder many times how, if she were here, how she would feel about the events that transpired. And we feel that if let's say it was impossible, let's just play this out theoretically, that if her murder could not be solved for whatever myriad of reasons, but in the process of attempting to solve her murder, what if a obstacle could be overcome that then allowed other murders to be solved, other cold cases, other families who never got answers? What if in the stretch goal of solving Betty's murder, we were able to help who knows how many other families, and familial DNA legislation might be that obstacle that we can overcome to help find justice, if not for Betty, then almost certainly for others. So let's move on to the next message. Debbie on Facebook writes, "Some family and friends are loving doing the 23andMe or Ancestry.com and learning about genealogy, finding distant family. Other family members do not want their info in any database. I understand it is not the same as CODIS. By the way, CODIS stands for Combined DNA Index System, where DNA is taken from suspects of certain crimes, and they can look to see if there are family members already in the system. I want crime solved, murders and rapes and assaults, kidnappings, and I like that they can pull up what somebody may look like from the DNA. Debbie went on to say that she also likes DNA proving innocence.
Yeah, and Debbie, I think you've hit the nail on the head, is the reason why familial search isn't just a no-brainer. I think that, especially in today's day and age, security is a significant issue. And one would think that if, for instance, if it was mandatory for all U.S. citizens to provide their DNA for search, on the surface, that sounds great, right? Like, why wouldn't we do that? But if you dig in deeper, there's a lot of privacy implications in that. And so there are certain people that are like family members that you were mentioning who are really skeptical of what the government or our law officials would do if they had that amount of information. And certainly that's where the debate comes into play. For us, we want it for very pure reasons. But I imagine that you could get there in your head about ways that you could abuse that particular system. And so, it's funny that you mentioned things like Ancestry.com. Like, that is a tool that we've used from the beginning of this podcast that my mom is deep in the weeds on. I mean, my mom is our family historian. Simon, we could talk a little about that. We just went on a family trip to Memphis, and one of the stops that my mom said we had to make was to the cemetery so she could go and look at various tombstones of family members. And because that's really important to her to know the roots and how everything's connected. And we've really leaned into that for this podcast because there's been, I can't tell you how many times I've picked up the phone and be like, okay, wait a second. So remind me how Betty is connected to this family member, and then how am I connected to this other one? Like, she's the person that really keeps track of all that. So just inherently, we come from a place where things like the information that we can get from DNA strands about our family and tools like Ancestry.com are immensely valuable. But to some, there is a lot of skepticism around these particular searches. I think that whereas the way that it works right now for convictions, I think you mentioned real quick that it said that DNA is taken from suspects. I just want to clear that up, and because I had that same question to Sergeant Lott when I was talking to him. It isn't from suspects. It's only from those that are convicted of crimes that those DNA strands go into the database. And listeners out there, if I'm wrong, which I don't think I am, because I'm pretty sure that I'm correct in saying that, but that's the difference. So it's not just, hey, you're suspected of a crime, we get your DNA and put it in that database. It's you've been convicted of a crime, and that's the database that we're testing against. That's your understanding as well, Simon, right?
Yeah, and there was a difference between, it touched in the episode about misdemeanors versus felonies, and how DNA can be collected from both in some circumstance. But yeah, it's we think, you mentioned this in the episode, but it's so true. Many of my friends, at least, think that DNA is this magic key, and if you only had the DNA, then 1 + 2 = 3, and you would have the person you need. And it's just the world doesn't work that way. And I wish it did. We all would do, but it just doesn't. And going back to, as DNA progresses and the technology moves forward, and certainly it's come miles and miles since 1990, there are exceedingly more and more privacy concerns. And not only do I want my information as an innocent citizen who is not a criminal, do I necessarily want my DNA on file, given that my name is, my address is, my fingerprint already is, all of this stuff, all this information is already there. Where's the line? Where's the line drawn as to what the government needs and what is too much for them to have in a database. Furthermore, even if that was considered a norm, then there's added concerns not only of what are nefarious things that can be done with that, but who safeguards it.
Yeah, for sure.
With as often as we hear of data breaches in the world, who is even if I trust the person who has my information, what is in place safeguarding another person from stealing it, be it some domestic or foreign even. There's threats from all over. So it's a very complicated issue. DNA is not black and white. It's not right and wrong. And as I said, as the technology progresses, there's a larger and larger, it seems, gray area divide in the conversation.
And I want you to hear us correctly. We both firmly believe that there are more good that comes from familial search to give law enforcement the tools that they need in order to be able to make better decisions, to pursue better leads. That's what we believe, but we just want to be able to really give a holistic picture of what we have discovered as we've sort of, unraveled this topic, that these are the things that people are concerned about. Now, my gut is that if done correctly, and I think there are a lot of smart people that are looking at this and are trying to figure out the right way to do it, I believe that there's more good that comes from this than bad. And therefore, we are strong advocates to make sure that this is a tool that law enforcement can use in the state of Mississippi. Debbie, thank you so much for your question. Let's take a quick break. While living in Ethiopia, some friends of mine witnessed firsthand the consequences of extreme poverty. They saw how Ethiopian women, in an effort to provide for themselves and their families, were forced to make unthinkable choices just to survive. These friends realized they wanted to give these women another choice, one that would provide them the opportunity to earn a living. It was from this experience that Fashionable was born. This movement started with a collection of hand-woven scarves, of which my wife has many, and has grown to include handmade leather bags and jewelry, apparel, shoes, and most recently, a premium denim line, lovingly crafted by women who have overcome extraordinary circumstances. We're so honored to partner with Fashionable and offer our listeners 15% off their first order. Go to livefashionable.com and use the discount code KNOCK15 at checkout. Again, visit livefashionable.com today to help bring opportunity and choice to these amazing women.
All right, we've got a few more questions. Donna writes, my mother was best friends with your grandmother when they were at MSU as cheerleaders. I spent many wonderful times with Betty when I was a child. I have followed this story for some time and just ran across this info. She was a ray of sunshine and had a horribly tragic life. Many losses.
Donna, wow. Thank you so much for taking the time to write in. The thing that's been amazing about this is how many people have really come out of the woodworks to share their stories about Betty and how she impacted their lives. And that's why this isn't just a typical true crime podcast, because it's hard as a step-grandson and someone who cared a lot about Betty. I can't dismiss these comments and questions and stories because they mean as much to me as the chance of getting her murdered solved. Like, we're committed to doing everything we can to get the story out there in order to find justice for Betty and Catherine. But at the same time, these moments, like Donna writing in, are so special to us because it reminds us both of what was taken away from us, what we've lost, but also the good and that continues to come from the memories that that Betty had with people, and that's where it gets pretty emotional. It can get, and some people don't like holding on through that emotion, and I totally understand. But it's important, both to me and Simon, I know to you as well.
Yeah, you can see it as sometimes I look at this as not just a podcast, but you can look at it like a collective social memorial.
Oh wow, man, that's a really cool way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Donna, what a wonderful thing to send us, and we hope to hear more from you. But honestly, Donna, we may have not ever been able to speak with you had it not been for this. Had we not created this essentially glorified digital memorial where people who maybe hear secondhand, thirdhand about this podcast can come to a place online and can communicate with us and can say, hey, I remember her. She mattered. Here's why. I'm so happy to hear that you remember her as well, and that you're still pursuing justice for the worst tragedy that befell her. So thank you, Donna. It's so wonderful to hear from you. And like I said, please, we replied to your email, and we'd love to hear back from you. So next, Cassandra writes, would it be fruitful to search Facebook profiles and other social media with the information we have? We have possible names, age, and basic appearance.
Yeah, Cassandra, thank you for writing in. I think that all of that is a bit of the reason why we are encouraging community, is not necessarily to go out and accuse people, but the thing that really drew me to making the podcast to begin with was this idea of in today's day and age, it doesn't just have to be just law enforcement, just legal representation, just lawmakers pursuing justice. What we are able to do in this social experiment that is true crime podcasting is that everyone can really go out there and start to do research. And then you can do that research and then bring it back to us to be able to think about and look at, and you can take it directly to the lead investigator of the case and say, hey, have you thought about this? Which I know some of our listeners have done and sent emails and information over to Sergeant Lott. And you know, it doesn't really matter if that results in something real, but what it is it's people that care enough to look under all of the rocks. And I mean, to be honest, as good of a job as the Starkville Police Department has done and continues to do, this is one 27-year-old case amongst all of the other work they do to help the citizens of Starkville. So what I always wanted to do is to be an additional resource and an additional help and hopefully an amplification of the work that they're doing and Betty and Catherine's stories. So absolutely, Cassandra, like anything that you do to research and to dig further into this, and the conversation that you have both with us and other people in the Knock Knock community, that's the goal. That's the point. That's the whole experiment of this. And we couldn't be more grateful for your interest. That's what really drives us to keep going.
And it's not a completely new concept either. I feel like when you come across true crime stories online, be it a podcast, be it a Facebook page or a forum, it's sort of I think of it as a natural technological evolution of the tip line.
Yeah, like in 1993 when they did Betty's story on America's Most Wanted, the very last thing that they showed was, if you have more information about this case, call the America's Most Wanted tip line.
Yeah, so it's not a new idea that the police, in many instances, depend on the general public for help with solving a case or finding new leads. What I think has changed is the ability for those that would have called a tip line for them to communicate with one another. In 1990, you were an individual. Maybe you had a friend, or maybe your friend had a friend, and the three of you could talk about the murder, and you could share thoughts or research with one another. But for the most part, individuals would call in, and they would leave their individual tip. There's no way for, let's say 100 people called in, there's no way for those 100 people to talk to one another.
And compare information.
To share ideas,
yeah.
to help one another,
right.
If they were passionate enough to research. And now, 2018, we have these tools, we have this, it's a very different world than it was in 1990, and we're able to do so much more with the idea, the concept of a group of regular, concerned individuals who may or may not be connected with the case on a family level can still make a difference. They can still, they can still help to push that domino, which could in turn push another domino, and who knows, could end up being a break or at least another lead.
Yeah, thank you, Cassandra. Such a great question. Thank you for writing in.
Okay, next, I want to make a quick note before our next question. Creating a podcast like this, it comes with a lot of humbling support, but it also can come with its inevitable criticisms. I want to be real clear that we are equally grateful for both. And we don't shy away from the critical feedback. We really do our best not to, as we believe it can only help to improve our ability to tell Betty and Catherine's story. So, that in mind, a listener recently wrote into us, and I'd like to share a few points from his message. Michael writes, "I hope you can see this as helpful criticism because I truly want you to solve this case. There are two major problems with this podcast. You forego sharing real information on the case and investigation for endless backstory about why you started the podcast. Secondly, the announcer you have hired to read police reports sounds like an announcer for a soap commercial. You should interview the actual police involved, interview neighbors, the maid, do some journalism. Give The Vanished or Atlanta Monster or Someone Knows Something a listen. Get a microphone and start talking to people."
Well, first of all, I want to thank Michael for having the courage to write in and really give some critical feedback. And like Simon said, we do read it, we don't ignore it, and we do take it to heart. And so I just want to go through a few of these things because I feel like I just want to respect and honor him writing in, and maybe some of you have had these thoughts as well. And so I'd love to just go behind the scenes and give you some more information about these things. So number one, he's talking about forgoing real information to tell endless story about why I started this podcast. And I think that's completely fair. And that was one of the contributing reasons why for episode 5, we wanted to play Sergeant Lott's interview really in its entirety, because that is the biggest chunk of real information that we have. We've done different interviews. We have a great interview coming up in our next episode that's going to be a similar approach. And so for me, when I read this and when I heard this feedback, it really convicted me to do less storytelling and more interviewing. Not that we haven't done a lot of interviews, but really delivering a straight interview to you guys and letting you really disseminate that information. Two, he talks about the announcer that we've hired. Let me just, I'm going to be really, really real with all of y'all. one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted people to be able to read some of the information that we have, that we've pulled from newspapers.com and from the Starkville Daily News and all of these places. And if you go to our website at knockknockpodcast.com and you go up to episodes, if you go to each individual episode, you can read the actual article that we talk about on each episode. So that they're all right there. And so please use that as a resource. We try to put everything we can based on an episode up there so that if people want to dig in further, they have those resources and can do some more research. But what I wanted to do is I wanted people to actually be able to hear it. So because we're on a very, very limited budget, this is all coming out of pocket, we hired some voiceover people from the website Fiverr.com, which is extremely cheap. People go on there who have the ability to do voiceover work, and they'll just pretty much work for hire. We'll send them over an article, they'll read it to us, and then we put that into our episodes. And so thank you for that feedback. I will continue to look for additional resources, but that's sort of what we've done so far. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware it wasn't some guy sitting in my house who also does soap commercials. It was someone that we've reached out to online and are paying him for his work. Then I guess the other thing is, and which I love that you brought up, The Vanished and Atlanta Monster and Someone Knows Something. Those are sort of hero podcasts to me. And I've done my best to try to emulate the things that they're doing really well. I know that Someone Knows Something is done by a professional journalist, and I just want to be really clear. I'm not a professional journalist. Atlanta Monster is by one of my heroes, Payne Lindsay, who is just a monster, like no pun intending. He's an amazing podcaster and has had a lot of success, and I'm an amateur compared to those guys. And so we're continuing to learn, and I just want to thank you. I want to thank anyone. I never want anybody to be shy about calling in or writing in and saying that there's something we could do better, because I want to do it better. So, Michael, you started and saying that I hope that you hope that I could see it as helpful criticism, and I do. And I want to thank you so much for writing in. Let's take another quick break. If there's one thing I've learned about Betty through this process, it's that her life was dedicated to giving back. I know she would have loved organizations like Thistle Farms. At first glance, Thistle Farms is a world-class provider of natural home and body products. In the summer, their bug spray is a must. But what is truly amazing about these items are the people who make them. All of Thistle Farms products are lovingly crafted by women, survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. You see, beneath the surface, what Thistle Farms really is a place that provides safe housing, economic independence, and a strong community of advocates for these women. Take a minute to visit thistlefarms.org and learn more about this amazing organization. And while you're there, use the discount code KNOCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's thistlefarms.org, where love is the most powerful force for change in the world. Simon, can you remind our listeners how they can connect with both you and further contribute to what we're doing?
Yeah, so if you're on Facebook, we have a Knock Knock Facebook group. It is private, but it's not a secret. So just ask to join, and we'll certainly add you to the group. There you can find other listeners, and you can post, and you can ask questions, and you can get a response not only from Jason and I, but from others in the community. We also have a voicemail set up. If you'd like to call in and be featured on a future Q&A episode, we'd love to hear from you. That phone number is 1-888-57-BETTY. Again, 1-888-57-BETTY. We've had some trouble with our voicemail recently, earlier this month. If you did call in and you weren't able to get through, I'm so sorry. Please do try again. It is set up. It is working. And thank you to those who have called in and left messages with us. We also have our website where you can contact us and send us a direct message through our website as well, if you prefer to do it that way.
Thanks to everyone who listened to episode 5. We're going to be back shortly with episode 6. We have an amazing interview with a gentleman by the name of Rock Harmon. He is really a leading voice in familial search DNA, and I know that you guys are going to be excited to really dig in and hear more about the specifics about how we can really move that forward in the state of Mississippi. To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts where people can find our show. Knock Knock is produced by Chris Cerrone and me. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team, Lacey Orcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Cole Flynn, Simon Jones, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas. We'll be back soon with our next full episode, so please share the podcast with your friends and family. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock Podcast.